There is a wholeness within each person waiting to arise when the time is right for you. You're on your journey. I hope these stories help. And every time I get to interview someone, I see that. And it's a real blessing. The Sincerely Show will host thousands of stories that have traveled through darkness and hurt to awakening and wholeness towards lives of contribution and service to humanity and our planet. Sincerely is a blanket where people can come and join and not be judged, and can be held inside a blanket, hearing and listening and absorbing other people's stories.
She does not ask questions to extract information.
I don't believe humans were built to be able to handle this level of anxiety as a result of information overwhelm and disinformation overwhelm. From the beginning of time, humanity transmitted knowledge, lesson, meaning, inspiration, hope through story. There are 8 billion of us on this planet. That makes 8 billion stories. Most of these stories are never spoken or written down. Often they are stories of hurt that have shaped our way of seeing ourselves, society, and the world. And I've since learned on my journey that each of us have souls, and each of us are in this lifetime are on a journey to find our way back to our wholeness.
She asks questions to set someone free.
The thing that I learned on my journey, there's hope. There's hope.
Good evening, everyone. What is happening in this room tonight is worth naming before we begin. A book has arrived, a show is about to be born, and everything you see here, the company, the podcast, came from one woman's decision to stop performing and start living. I've had the privilege of working alongside Katherine for the past year. I've watched her build Sincerely from the vision into something real. I've sat in rooms where she has interviewed guests with the quality of presence I can only describe as witnessing. She does not ask questions to extract information. She asks questions to set someone free. Tonight, for the first time, she is the one in the chair. The Sincerely Show is a place. It is a journey. It is a movement towards living a life that is more sincerely human. And the woman who created it walked every inch of that path herself. Through grief and through courage, most of us will never be asked to find. Please welcome Katherine Dudtschak to The Sincerely Show.
Wow.
Katie. How would you like to introduce yourself to everyone here tonight?
I am curious, and I am meaning-making, and I love big, really big. And I feel really big, and I'm expressive, and I'm playful. I am. That's who I am. And I've lived in many worlds in this lifetime and many other lifetimes. And I feel blessed. I feel blessed to be able to live a life of love and joy and peace and freedom that I could have never in a million years have imagined. And I'm grateful. I'm grateful for the dark and the heavy times. They served as a path to my deeper self. And they served as a pathway to heal and to grow and to awaken. and they served as a path to be able to feel so deeply for others. Yeah, that's who I am.
What does it feel like to be on the other side?
I have so much gratitude. I have so much gratitude and freedom. I remember a period during COVID. I had already come out. One of the things I talk about at Sincerely is the pattern of collapse, coming back, or awakening, or emergence, and then collapse, and then crawling back, and awakening, and emerging. And, over my life, I've had multiple collapses and, periods of growth. And I feel, as I said already, I feel now grateful for those. I wouldn't wish them on anybody. Yet those moments of darkness and collapse are what bring us closer ultimately to our soul, to our essence. I use the words I am, and if you follow the spiritual community at all, there's this thing called I amness. And it essentially, my interpretation of it is it means to live from soul or essence first through your through your physical self and your inherited self, which is genetics and epigenetics. I now feel free to do that. I feel coherent in a way that I could have never dreamt was possible. So I feel free. I feel alive. I feel love. I feel sorrow in a way that is so deep and rich that I don't know if you can be more grateful than profoundly grateful for the life that I get to live today. And the irony of it to our guests, you'd be looking at this and going, does she not know what the heck is going on in this world? It's not lost on me at all. It's not lost on me at all, the level of social fracture on this planet and the level of economic divide on this planet. And it's not just economic divide between humans, it's economic divide between nations, which is a source of conflict in this world. And the level of degradation of our planet that has happened, the proliferation of information and disinformation that exists in the world. I don't believe humans were built to be able to handle this level of anxiety as a result of information overwhelm and disinformation overwhelm and social fracturing and economic divide and degradation of our planet. So I'm fully aware of what I call the 4 existential crises of our time that I see as the root of all of the crises of our time, whether it's war or the mental health pandemic that exists. I feel and sense that these 4 existential crises are all at the root of it. And I also have this sense from my lived experience and the stories of others that many, if not most of us, are not living from coherence, not living fully from our essence or soul, and again, through our physical self, through our inherited self, out into the world. And when you don't get to feel and express your trueness, your true self, we say, bring your whole self to work. I think that starts at an essence or soul level. When you can't bring all of that to your family or to your work or to your community, you are depriving oxygen from the being of being a human. And so, from all the people I've interviewed and spent time with, the outer world that we live in, the challenges of the outer world that we live in seem incredibly connected to the fact that we have created a world that doesn't really foster inner coherence of the humans that inhabit the world. And so I go full circle back to your question, how do I feel? I feel so free and so alive and so much love and so much gratitude. I feel blessed to be able to live the life that I live and have the love in my life that I have and the love that I feel inside of me at this time of reckoning, I think, this time of reckoning for the planet and for humanity. And I have this sense that the level of personal crisis and personal transformation will only increase given these anxieties and pressures that people feel. And I know in the core of my being that there's a pathway through. There's a pathway through not just my heaviness and darkness, but there's a pathway through for everyone. And, the thing that I learned on my journey is there's hope. There's hope. And if my story and other people's stories of service to humanity and the planet and other people's stories of finding their wholeness and their stories through hardship, through awakening, if those stories can act as inspiration, hope, meaning, lessons for others, then I want to be part of creating a world where those stories can be shared, where those stories can be normalized. And it's a long answer to I live with a level of love and hope at a time that, is pretty heavy for our world. And I am going to live every moment of my life with a knowing and a sense that there's another side and that it's available for us to choose. So I feel really privileged and I feel so much gratitude.
It's really beautiful. And you sit in that chair normally interviewing others to get their stories and their journeys. And it's beautiful to have witnessed that. And this is our opportunity for you to share, your journey and your story. So can you take us back a little bit to the beginning before there was the book, the podcast, the show, the farm, all the, essentially you living in your essence fully?
Yeah, so I came into this world on March 9th, 1966. We're in a firehorse year. I came into this world, born to two loving parents who came to Canada to build a better life. And my mother grew up in what's now Poland. It was called Prussia at the time. She was born in Prussia. She spent many of her early years, like at around age 6 or 8, becoming a child refugee. And her mother, and this was during the Second World War. My mother was born in 1935. And so I was born to a mother that survived the Second World War, survived being a refugee, survived, being a caregiver to her little sister in a refugee camp at 8 years old, protecting her little sister from bullies in a refugee camp at 8 years old. What child would you ever, put that upon? And my father was born in a little village in what was called Sudetenland, which is now Chechnya, or the Czech Republic. And he was born in this little village called Kumon. And it's a lumber village. And for those in Canada, it looks a lot like the countryside near Timmins, near Gogama. And, relatively flat, rolling hills, lots of sand, and these beautiful big coniferous trees. And this pond where my father used to go fishing with his brother, who was only 10 months older than him. Like, figure that out. Poor mother. And his mother had a disability and his father drank. And he grew up in a home that had, an angry father, an abusive father. And at 14 years old, at the end of the Second World War, as Russia moved into what is now Czechoslovakia, these young boys were all captured and put into Russian prison camps. And so my father spent the next 3 years from 14 to 17 in multiple Russian prison camps. And I believe it was 3 different camps he was in. And my sister Mona had the brilliance to interview my mom and dad in the mid-90s about their story. And he talked about these 3 prison camps, which he never talked about in childhood. And he talked about it not being abnormal to wake up in the morning with a dead body beside you, or to have someone, returning at the end of the day or returning in the morning, beaten to a pulp. And so from age 14 to 17, he experienced these prison camps where you'd be out harvesting rutabagas and literally living on bread and water. Like, horrific. Who would wish that on any human being, any young boy, any young man in their formative years? And then by the end of the Second World War, like my mother, when the walls were redrawn, when the borders were redrawn in the Second World War, he was extricated because he was German and sent to Germany. He had to cross the wall. He had to cross from East Germany to West Germany in the darkness of night, and I talk about this in Sincerely Catherine. But he was skin and bones. And he literally had a bolt of cloth in his backpack. And I suspect it was linked to the fact that my grandmother, his mother, her first husband died, and he was a tailor. So he had some intuition to keep this bolt of cloth because it might be worth something, because there was no money in the war. So both of his parents died during the war. He was in prison camp. He had to flee across the wall to get to West Germany and to go find his brother. And he used a bolt of cloth to exchange for food and transport to get him to, West Germany, to Remscheid and Wermelskirchen, where he ultimately reunited with his brother. So both parents brought that war trauma with them to a better life in Canada. And the farm I grew up on, it was a mink farm of all things. I liked the beauty of mink, back to my feminine side, yet I hated working on the farm. I had allergies, I hated shoveling manure, and because of the anxiety and the trauma my parents brought, there was a lot of yelling and there was a lot of anxiety in our home, and deep, deep fears of money, not being able to provide and put food on the table, and not knowing whether there was going to be Christmas presents. So that was the beginning of my life. And the good thing about being a kid is you don't know any different. It's just your life. You don't know that you're developing a high hypersensitivity to be able to read the energy of your parents and avoid conflict and avoid triggering them or avoid getting yelled at. And so that was the beginning. And then from there, I went to school. And, I was this playful, expressive, curious child that was constantly getting in trouble in school. And I was this kid, thank goodness there is goodness to the internet, and there is a good side of AI, to my earlier points, if we use it for good. I had my hand up all the time. If you were my teacher and I could just milk you for information and forget about the other 20 students, I'd be happy, because I just wanted to learn. I was so deeply curious. And yet I couldn't write, I couldn't communicate the way other kids did. And so I do poorly on tests, and I felt judged by teachers. If Katie would only apply, in my old name, if Katie would only apply herself, she'd do so much better. Well, I didn't know that I was dyslexic, and I've never been formally tested. And, it's only later in life that I came to understand what dyslexia is, and people that know it well had looked at me and go, of course you're dyslexic. There's just no question based on how you carry yourself in the world. The first part of grade 2, I spent in the hall because I started to act out. And then that wasn't working for the teacher or the principal. So they decided to move my desk into the corner. It's funny on one hand. On the other hand, you go, who would do that to a 7-year-old kid, to isolate them and ostracize them by parking their desk in a corner? In hindsight, it was horrible. That was kind of the beginning. And, this is the thing when you're neurodiverse and you develop this hypersensitivity and this problem-solving skill early in life in order to fit into your home and your environment. I became really determined by the end of public school and into high school that I was going to prove to my parents that I could build a better life, and I was going to prove to those teachers that I was smart enough and that I was talented enough. And I went on a path to find the perfect partner and build a beautiful family, and I was never going to let anybody get in the way of me achieving my potential in this material world that we live in. And the thing that also was there in childhood was that I was not just curious and a problem solver, and I happened to love machines, and I'd love driving my tractor, and I wanted snowmobiles and dirt bikes and all those things that are mechanical, and I loved fishing and the outdoors. And I was also, deeply feminine or deeply sensitive and deeply feeling, and I loved pretty things. And a year and a half to 2 years old, I learned to crawl out of the crib. Mom would go to the farm to take care of the animals, and Dad would work in a factory, and I would crawl out of the crib in my curiosity and determination, and I would tear the house apart. I'd look for the man in the radio, and I would look through my dad's drawers and look at these I can picture them, these old white boxer shorts with holes in them, fart holes. And I remember in my dad's drawer was this alarm clock, the old wind-up alarm clock, and I thought, well, this is boring. And then I would go to my mother's drawers, and there were these beautiful silk, slips and, camisoles, and I would go to her jewelry box, and I'd put on the clip earrings, and I'd go to the bathroom and put on the lipstick. Like, that was fun. That never went away. It wasn't an experiment. It was like, I felt so alive, and I felt so free, and it never really went away. And so here I was caught between worlds of having a very masculine side, yet also this very feminine side of me. Yet when you're like 4 years old and you grow up in a world where you don't know what LGBT is, and and everybody's church going, and you're watching these families drive by the farm on Sundays off to church, and you learn pretty quickly that you fit into a box. And so that feminine secret remained buried. Not from me. It remained buried from the world because I learned how to fit in and go on to build a beautiful family and marry a beautiful partner and build in material terms an amazing career by taking jobs I didn't think anybody else would ever want. And moving all around the countryside to take the next job and earn more money and to prove to others, and I guess maybe to prove to myself that I was good enough. It worked, yet it wasn't complete. It wasn't complete.
Did you have that awareness when you were in the life that you had built for yourself? And how did that feel when you were in that process and that journey?
Yeah, awareness is an interesting word. So I'll stick with the feminine side for a minute, and then I'll broaden it to others. Liking pretty things doesn't go away. Seeing a great outfit and going, shit, I wish I could wear that outfit. Or, fuck, those are great shoes. Like, that doesn't go away. Like, when you're drawn to something, elegance or beauty, you're drawn to it. It doesn't go away. And because I had built such a full and busy life, 4 beautiful kids, constantly projects on the weekend, and a day job that increasingly more and more demanding. 5 or 6 years ago, I used to pride myself in the corporate world of being able to spin 20 plates at the same time. These feminine tendencies never left. And I was drawn to other women that embodied a way of being that I longed for. I married someone who I not only loved, but I envied and respect as, an incredible woman. So those things never left, just nobody else knew it. And this is where I broaden it to others. It is amazing what human beings are capable of doing when we feel shame, when we feel guilt, and we don't have self-love, and where we're worried about being rejected. It is amazing what we say to fit in. It is amazing how we smile and laugh to fit in. And it is amazing how we, become a guy's guy in order to fit in and say hurtful things to people. Like, it is remarkable what a human being is capable of when we are operating from anxiety or fear of being judged or not being good enough. I had a lot of what's pretty typical is, patterns of shame, of guilt, of fear that acted as guardrails and beliefs that women don't do this, men don't do that. These belief systems, these walls that we build in order to fit into this world that humanity lives in, a world that is, the society and the world that we live in is, for a long time, I'd argue as long as 6,000 years, has been a path of humanity that is extractive, that was built to survive based on extracting value from the planet and from other human beings. And over time, especially in the last 100 years, and even more so in the last 30 years, a way of being that is performative, where we perform to fit into a world that is extracted in order to enable humanity to survive. We don't need to live in that world anymore. That's not the only way human beings need to live. And so the female or feminine tendencies that I had never disappeared. I just was busy enough that I didn't have to think about them all the time. I was able to suppress them and get back to being busy. And I had developed, like many people do, a set of guardrails, fears, anxieties, beliefs to keep me performing the way I thought I should perform as an executive, as in a man's world or what have you. And you, as I say in the book, you can run, but you can't hide. If there is something deep within you that is from your soul, is part of your natural wiring, you can run, but you can't hide. George, in my book, talking about one of our children growing up, what if one of them grew up to be gay? And I was still living in a man's world, and we would party on weekends, and, we'd get drunk together, and we'd cry together after a few drinks, and we got into this conversation. Well, what if one of our children came out as gay? And George said the most beautiful, profound thing. And he goes, I could love them on my deathbed and reconcile with on my deathbed, or I could love and embrace them for who they are from the moment they told me. you can run, but you can't hide. So if there's something deep within you, whether it's a creative spirit or creative energy or emotional side or intellectual ability, it doesn't matter what the aspect of essence is. If it's in you and you don't give it oxygen, it steals oxygen from you. And it results in anxiety. It results in energy not being able to flow through your body. It can result in disease. And, for me, that reckoning, started around age 45, where I started to burn out in the corporate world. I led a restructuring of a bank in the Caribbean. And, from a shareholder value perspective, I was being applauded by the board of directors for a record turnaround, and I was being applauded by the CEO for saying, I had no idea you had it in you to run a bank and to restructure the company. Yet that experience crushed my heart. Because previous leaders, and I'm not judging them, every human being is doing the best they know how at a moment in time, based on their level of awareness and their level of growth. They had built a bank that wasn't sustainable. They had lent money to people that could never pay them back. And part of it was ego. They wanted to build a company up and get it ready to sell so they could make their money and move on. And here I was leading the team, and two of my most loving, dear colleagues are in the room that were part of that team. And they know it better than anybody. I would bawl my eyes out with 6,000 employees on the line and saying, we were in the media every week because employees no longer trusted management. And I just said, I'm going to just tell you the truth. This company is failing. And I will do everything I can. The team and I will do everything we can to save this company and as many jobs as possible. And 40% of the workforce ended up being terminated in countries where they might have not got a job. And so I was around 45. And so on one level, it was a successful business turnaround, yet it was a perfect case study on not building a company that was sustainable for the long term, where you had to fire 40% of the workforce. And it broke my heart. And my image back to childhood and teenage life of achieving wisdom and enlightenment by becoming a CEO was like crushed. And I go, oh my goodness, this system we've built isn't working. Country leaders are managing for elections and short-term gains, and companies are being built for short-term, often financial performance, yet it's not working. It's hurting people. And that was the beginning. That was one of my first, what I call true collapses, where it broke my heart. And it was coming out of that job. I was asked, do you want to do this job or this job? And for the first time in 30 years, I said, I want to do the job that I know I will be able to do intuitively, where I'll work with 25,000 people. I know their jobs. I'll lead from my heart. I'll bring them on a journey as the world digitizes, and we'll transform their jobs and protect their jobs, and we'll take them from being transactional bankers to teachers and educators and advisors. I know how to do that job. And for the first time, I picked a job that I could do intuitively. And it was the exact same time that our 4 children were getting older and going off to university. And that was the beginning. And this feminine side of me that I had been suppressing and hiding and not acknowledging got really, really loud.
This sounds like it was the beginning of not hiding anymore, right? You talk a lot about in Sincerely Katherine, some of the darkest times in your life. Can you take us back to that and share a little bit about what unfolded as you began to be not hiding?
So shortly after I took that role on, I hired an executive coach who went around the company and got input on me. And he sits down with me and he said, people in the company are describing you as one of the strongest communicators in the company, and maybe the strongest, and this heart-centered leader and this empathic person. And he was describing what in energetic terms are more feminine attributes, not soft, actually harder attributes in the world that we live in, because they're not embraced. And I kept saying to him, yeah, but did they say my financial acumen was good? And did they say my strategic thinking was good, more mechanical skills? And he goes, yeah. But, these ones over here, leadership and communication and, these other things, people are just like saying, like, you're incredible. And it was in that moment, I didn't say it to the life coach or the executive coach. I said, what would happen if I accepted these attributes to be true as gifts, as part of me? And it was in that fall, I brought my oldest daughter to university, and I saw this poster in the hallway of the dorm room with somebody assigned male at birth wearing a silk blouse and white pearls, and the poster said, "Embrace gender variance." And I thought, oh my God, could the world become so open and free that I could be me? And then I saw a National Geographic about gender, and then my mother passed away, and my sisters give me her jewelry box. I bawled my eyes out. And then in August of that year, I booked a lunch with a colleague because Caitlyn Jenner had come out, and I said, who the heck is Caitlyn Jenner? Like, this does not make sense to me. It shows you how high the walls were that I had built, how prim and proper, and how much I fit into a hyper-masculine man's world. And he explained it to me. And he explained to me that gender is who you go to sleep as. It's your inner self. And sexual orientation is who you go to sleep with. And in that moment, you could have pushed me over with a feather. Within hours, my anxiety went through the roof. I had an answer to a question, a scab that I'd been scratching for 50 years. And that night I went home on the internet and Googled differently than I'd Googled many times before. And I got Caitlyn Jenner's story and other people's story of people like me that had a very strong feminine or female side to them that they tried to hide, and they built lives that were more masculine in order to fit into a man's world. And within days, my anxiety went through the roof. And I told my spouse at the time, within a week of that, and I said, I think I'm wired female on the inside. And she goes, what the hell is that? And we cried together for weekend after weekend, night after night. And within a year, I was suicidal. And I wanted life to be over. I had such a fear of rejection and abandonment, and I had friends from childhood that were extremely religious that I didn't think would embrace me. I didn't think the corporate world was ready. Yet I knew now what transgender was. I knew how I was wired. And, I wanted life to be over. And it was a dear friend, Leanne, that could read my signals and says, if you want, Katie, I'll send you intergenerational trauma research on children that experienced suicide of a parent. And I was stopped dead in my tracks because my plan was flawed. And I wrote a letter of intention, which is in the book, at that time to embrace my whole self and go on a journey to embrace my whole self. Came out to my children, came out to the CEO, went and saw myself in the mirror for the very first time in New York in March of 2019. And then I came out to the world. I came out to 80,000 people on June 17th, 2019, by way of a video where I bared my soul and showed vulnerability to 80,000 people in hopes that that my vulnerability and my heart opening would give them enough sense of the journey I was on that they would give me a second chance to prove that I could be as good as or better than I was before as their leader. and in hopes that I could keep my job and finish putting my kids through school and making sure that our family was cared for. And within 10 months, I was receiving hundreds and hundreds of emails talking about bravery and courage. And I'm going like, I hate those words. Like, there's nothing about this that's elegant at all. It's literally death-defying. I described the journey as the next to impossible journey. And it's a journey that many human beings travel. It's not impossible, it just feels next, like a hair away from being impossible. I was a fairly empathic leader, and people had a tendency to tell me their life stories that worked closely with me. And so for about 20 years, I had people working closely with me talking about their childhoods and other experiences, which I always honored. I was drawn to people's stories. I was drawn to the human condition. And here I was at scale getting emails of people from the Caribbean whose family were stoned because they were gay, or someone from India who had, abandoned his friend, who had ostracized his friend, who said he was gay, who was put into an arranged marriage and later died by suicide after being put into arranged marriage. And this gentleman from India had said to me that he had carried guilt of, ostracizing his friend his whole life. To a woman walking into my office saying, Katie, because you were open with me, I feel less alone in the world. And she went on to tell me about her first husband and how he physically and emotionally abused her and how she thinks about it every day. I had all these stories that I was hearing from people, and I realized that I wasn't the only person hiding in fear and shame and guilt and hurt, or aspects of identity that had been denied. To be trusted with these stories became initially a burden, because I felt somehow my job was to fix their problems. And I've since learned on my journey that each of us have souls, and each of us are in this lifetime are on a journey to find our way back to our wholeness, to a truth that's within us, to remembering things within us and overcoming those hurts and those fears and healing them. So for a long time, I took it as a burden, which I ultimately had to heal. Yet I felt so privileged and so blessed to be trusted with these stories. Yet I went back to a dark place. When I left my work family, I was given a new opportunity in the company that I had spent 37 years at, and I just started to cry. And I said, I need to retire. I need to go. I'm not going to go into a job I don't want. I'm not going to go into a job that's not going to allow me to express myself fully. And I broke down, and I said, no, it's time to retire. And then that year was 2022, which is the beginning of book number 2. That's when the inner journey began. That's when the journey to being Katherine began. For 2 months, daily, I would cry in the park next to my house, missing my work family and feeling the hurt of humanity because of the stories that people shared with me, and grieving my beautiful children growing up and leaving home, which many parents can relate to. It's not wrong for a parent to grieve their children growing up, but our job is to set them free, not to control them or coddle them. Yet I still miss them because I love family so deeply. And I hadn't grieved my divorce. And so for the first time in my life, in August, September, October, November of 2022, I experienced aloneness in a way that I'd never experienced in my life. And it all goes back to crawling out of the crib at 2 years old, and my mother coddling me and snuggling with me when she'd come in from the farm. And I suspect in some ways, loving me, and feeling her love for me because she still was grieving the loss of her father in the war. And then she would disappear out to the farm for hours on end. And so I would go from this oscillating deep love and affection to aloneness. And here I was now in 2022 alone during the week. My dear friend Laura had a job, and I had my dear friend Jamie was there to talk to me because she was an entrepreneur, so she could take time off during the day. And my sister was there to listen to me. But I grieved and I grieved and I grieved for many months. My coach at the time was Theano, and what an angel and what a saint she was to me. She taught me how to feel into my body and to release pain and hurt that was trapped in my chakras. And I learned to meditate. It ultimately resulted in me meeting Patricia and meeting my next life coach and beginning to learn to just be with hurt and pain and let it flow and let it pass through and not try to control it. And it was the beginning of my journey to truly finding love within myself. And so those are 2 or 3 of the heavier chapters. Yet, Carrie, as you can tell, these moments of what I call collapse and heaviness and darkness ultimately were a collapse of aspects of identity that I had built to fit into the world. And I ultimately brought me to these places of emptiness where you're left saying, if not for a 37-year career with that company, if not for 4 children at home, who am I? And in that darkness, you find yourself. And yes, you need a village around you. You need therapists, you need coaches, you need 2 or 3 people that won't judge you, that will allow you to grieve, that will hold space for you, that believe in you unconditionally at your soul level. They can see your essence and know that this feeling of worthlessness isn't the real you. And each time you go through these deep collapses, you meet yourself at the bottom, and then you come back. You climb back, more aware of and more accepting of your natural gifts, your natural essence. And then you build a life around those things. It works for a while, and then you go through another upset and collapse, and you find out parts of yourself that you didn't know before, and then you emerge again more true and more whole. I just turned 60, and my gender journey really started 9 years ago. And, in that 9-year period, I experienced 2 or 3 pretty heavy collapses. And I went through another interesting period about 9 months ago where, again, I was in a beautiful job in a beautiful company as a CEO, record performance, and yet it got heavy again. Quarterly board meetings, meeting after meeting with your team, creating the same PowerPoint deck you created 3 months ago. And having to help people complete, and I go like, I'm going to turn 60. I'm going to turn 60 in 9 months. Like, this is a great job. And it's a great company. Yet, it was starting to feel heavy again. And I just said, okay, this heaviness, there's a mess in. I'm not going to fight this. This time, I'm not going to fight it. There's a heaviness here. And at the same time, we were getting ready to release Sincerely Katherine. At the same time, I was exploring the Sincerely show and Sincerely the platform. And at that time, I didn't resist it. I surrendered and I said, okay, by September a year ago, I said, nope, I'm being called. I'm being called to move on. And I think I have enough money to put food on the table. And I'm just going to go where I feel called. And I'm going to trust that a calmer, more gentler life, a life as an author, a life as a creative, a life as a storyteller, maybe this thing of creating a platform for other people to tell their stories will create enough inspiration and meaning and lessons in the world for others to see them through to the other side of their stories. at a time in humanity where there's so much anxiety and so much uncertainty, maybe this idea of storytelling, maybe this sense that I had that Sincerely Katherine is just one story and there's many others out there waiting to be told, can be an act of service and can help others. But I went through another period where it wasn't working or wasn't feeling right anymore. And this time I just decided to surrender easily and follow the inspiration and the synchronicities that were taking me to Sincerely.
Let's talk a little bit about sincerely and that word and what it means. Right? You talk about sincerely as a cathedral, as a safe place for people, as a warm blanket. There's many ways in which you describe it.
Yeah.
What does it mean to you?
There's one of the guests of the Sincerely show, Dr. John Izzo, is a friend and he's a professor and has done a lot of work on purpose-driven leadership. And I was sharing with him Sincerely. And I said, somebody called it a cathedral. I go, like, that invokes a visceral reaction from me, given the amount of hurt in the world and death in the world that some religions have created. And he goes, Katie, the world needs new churches. I thought it was cute. And so I don't think of cathedral, or I don't think of Sincerely as a cathedral or a church, albeit when you go back and research the true meaning of church, it means to come together in connection, in oneness. So the meaning, the word can invoke a visceral reaction in the world today, yet the meaning of religion, to come together, to come to wholeness, are actually beautiful words if you go to their original essence. The other word that I spend time reflecting on that has multiple meanings to it is sermon. So the word sermon is, again, it invokes for me a visceral reaction because that infers a priest telling you what to think. Yet there's another way that if you treat the word sermon as neutral and don't make it mean anything negative other than if I sit with a story that's shared in the most honest, vulnerable, authentic way possible, what do I have to learn or gain from that story? As I sit with the word sermon, or if I sit with the word story, heart-centered, vulnerable, authentic story, what shows up for me is from the beginning of time, humanity transmitted knowledge, lesson, meaning, inspiration, hope through story. Indigenous cultures, long before this Western world, arguably this Western world is about 6,000 years old. It began as agricultural started to take hold and we started to produce excess food, and then that created room for commerce and trade, and that created room for storage and transportation. And suddenly you ended up with the beginnings of modern day capitalism and consumerism. And so if you go long before and go to indigenous cultures in Australia that are where you find the oldest continuous indigenous cultures of 20,000 years and 40,000 years, they found a way to live in harmony with self, each other, and the land and nature and the stars and the moon through story, through calm, through quiet, through observation, and through story. I think story as sermon or story as a vehicle to transmute or awaken a remembering within people of who they really are as a pathway to inner reflection, as a pathway to inspiration, hope, meaning, and lessons, I think has beautiful potential. Sincerely is a blanket where people can come and join and not be judged and can be held inside a blanket, hearing and listening and absorbing other people's stories, and hopefully stories told in the most vulnerable, authentic, and insightful ways that create a pathway for others toward a life lived sincerely human, towards a pathway of dedicating our life to a life of service or a life of contribution to others or to planet. And the remarkable thing about so many people that have come into my life before Sincerely, whether it's Patricia, whether it's Delphine, whether it's Bruce, whether it's Paul, whether it's Laura, like you can go on and on and on down the list. Every one of them had collapses, periods that took them deeper into themselves, to finding parts of themselves that they had forgotten, that they had to remember or that they remembered. And every one of them emerged more whole, more complete, and more living their life through a sense of servitude or a sense of service or contribution to humanity. Whether that contribution is protecting democracy or protecting human rights or building the next education platform that fosters wholeness within young people and the ability to hold space for other humans and the ability to honor nature. It's remarkable what happens when people journey inside of themselves back to this place through some of the heaviest and darkest periods of life, through to awakening, through to greater wholeness, and through to whatever calls us and becomes our offering of service and contribution to our next door neighbor, to our community, to humanity, or to the planet. And so Sincerely is a blanket that holds space for these stories to be told and holds space for those stories to be received with the inspiration, hope, meaning, lessons available to, emerge for others. As we move from an extractive, performative world over time to a world that is regenerative and coherent. And coherence is living from our essence through our physical body and inherited self out into the world as an offering of our true essence and as an offering of service and contribution to the world. All stepping stones to building a regenerative and coherent world. So that's how I think of Sincerely.
So you've had the opportunity to start interviewing amazing, extraordinary individuals, some who are in this room with us today. I'm curious, as you've had these conversations, what have you learned about your own story?
Number one, when you live from your essence, and you asked me in the beginning, introduce myself, and I said, curious, meaning-making, loving, expressive, holy crap. I could interview people every day for the rest of my life on their stories. I've been curious about the human condition from the time I was as young as I can imagine. I remember my 2-year-old self, and I take groups on this journey. I ask them to close their eyes, and I take them on a meditation. Then I ask them to go back to their youngest self, either when they were getting into trouble for expressing themselves in a way that was not appropriate to their parents, or a place where they were truly free and joyful. I remember 2 years old going with my father going to visit a friend or a group of friends, and I was doing my why, and they were all giggling at me. Now I get to be my mature version, my wise version of my 2-year-old self. I get to be on Zoom or in person with people with fascinating stories, and I could do this for the rest of my life. It just brings me so much joy. So that is the first part. The second part is you actually, and I say this to any human being that's been through stuff, I had no idea that I had so much perspective. And I'm not saying my life story is the right life story or my path is the right path. And I'm not saying the models that I've created for Sincerely are perfect. There's a research arm of Sincerely called Sincerely Human, where over time we'll validate whether these models, and we'll validate it with research to bring strength to it. Yet I also sit with this profound gratitude for the amount of relatability that I have from having lived in a man's world and a woman's world and growing up on a poor farm and being neurodiverse, being at the top of the corporate world, to having worked around the world, to having parents that survived war. Like, I now look at all of these as hard or heavy, yet blessings that have contributed to a perspective that I get to hold when I sit with someone else's story, that fuel the empathy that's within me. And so I reflect on that. And then I continually reflect each time on the person's story. And you called them remarkable people. They're remarkable not because of material terms. They're remarkable because each of them have found their way to a greater sense of wholeness, a greater sense of inner harmony, and they found a sense of calling for humanity in the world, a sense of service. And every story, I'm blown away. And I see it over and over and over again. There is a wholeness within each person waiting to arise when the time is right for you. You're on your journey. I hope these stories help. And there is an act of service or a calling or an offering in everyone. And every time I get to interview someone, I see that. And it's a real blessing.
I think your interviews are as much for you and the other person as will be for your audience as well. And who is your audience? Who do you hope that this Sincerely show finds?
It's a great question. So given my experience, the Sincerely show will, because of my reputation and background in the corporate world and the fact that I'm well known as a CEO or a former corporate CEO and senior executive, there is a natural group of people in leadership that are feeling that the way they're either being led or the way that they're leading is no longer working in this world. And so they're looking for, a pathway to becoming more whole and complete on the inside so that they can lead more authentically and more collaboratively and more toward a regenerative and coherent world. So there's a leadership community that will follow. There already is women and men that are emerging from their own crisis or their own difficulty and challenges that want to hang out with other people that have done it as a source of ongoing inspiration. Because when you go through collapse after collapse and you go inward and you heal and you grow and then you rededicate yourself to a life of service or whatever your calling is, it can feel lonely. And so having people that you can turn to give you ongoing inspiration and sense of community is really, really helpful. So anyone that's emerging from their own awakening or their own crisis that's looking for community and looking for ongoing lessons and inspiration and guidance on their journey will join Sincerely. The other thing that I will say that this kind of invokes, because I didn't say someone who is in the depths of despair. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a therapist. I'm not, an individual certified life coach. I'm a storyteller. I'm a field holder. I'm a space holder. So, it's so important that people in the depths of darkness surround themselves with community and that they're receiving the necessary guidance and support to carry them through that heaviness and through that darkness. They may too choose to listen to the stories of Sincerely, to find their calling or to find people like them. In the 2-year period from the lunch of 2017, where I learned of my gender, to my coming out, in that period, I read between 50 and 70 books. I was looking for hope. I was looking for people like me that had done it, that got to the other side and kept their family, kept their job, etc. Story was important. I was looking for story. I was looking for hope. Yet I also had built a community of therapists and of other support to add to the blanket that Sincerely is.
What would you tell somebody that is maybe not in the despair, but they're feeling they're not living from their essence, or they're living with a secret or something they haven't shared? What kind of advice would you give them?
Find space in your life to be with self. I would say, get a good psychologist, find healers that you resonate with. And when I say a good psychologist, there are lots of well-trained psychologists. A good psychologist is one that is well-trained and resonates with you, where you can trust and, they can join you on your journey. Healers, other modalities are the same. So find people, build your 2 or 3 people that can help you explore parts of yourself and create that professional blanket, but also the soft blanket of love that you need as you explore yourself. It does start, though, with creating enough time and space in your life where you can go inward and sit with these questions, where you can go to bed at 8 o'clock and close your eyes and try to remember yourself at 2 years old or 3 years old or 5 years old. Try to find within you those things that you once brought you joy, that you've deprived as you became performative in the world, which we all do. And so creating space to go inward and then experimenting and playing with those things and seeing if they still fit within your life. So experimenting and playing and creating calm in your life and creating a small village around you of support are key. And the last thing I would say, and I'm not minimizing the potential of Sincerely, there is no silver bullet. Storytelling is an opportunity for, as I say, hope, inspiration, meaning, and lessons. Yet I've shared with you already that my journey is anywhere from 9 years to 15 years long. And today I get to live from a level of love and joy and peace and freedom and creativity that I could have never imagined. There was no light, there's no light switch, because the inner journey is an inner journey.
Probably wouldn't be worth it if it was that easy, right? Before we wrap tonight, would love for you to share maybe a quote or a section of your book, Sincerely, Katherine, with us.
I found this quote in my coming out, in my journey, and I think it was so the lunch was 2017. I came out in 2019. I found this quote somewhere in there. Modus vivendi, a rhythm and a way of being in the world. This is my promise to myself. It is quite simple. Nothing that is meant for you will ever get away. Love deeply, without the need to possess or to own. Let beautiful connections pass through you without attachment. Slam your heart into the people and the places and the things that ignite something deep within your soul. And I promise, the right things will stay. You will never lose what is for you. This is my mantra. This is what I live by. Slam your heart into the people and the places and the things that ignite something deep within your soul. This might sound corny, given the world we live in. I have enough love in this heart for 8 billion people because I've lived and I know what's possible when human beings live from love, when human beings live from kindness, and from curiosity and from compassion. And they include us, and they're included as whole. And we learn to love ourselves, and we learn to love and hold space for others, and we learn to love our planet and this beautiful world that we live in. I have a love of my children and my family and my friends and community, and I have a love of 8 billion people because I know what's possible in the core of my being.
What is your wish for humanity?
My wish for humanity is to as many of the 8 billion people to find love for themselves, inside of themselves, and for each other, and for this beautiful planet. I don't know if there's another being that has the ability to observe itself and observe nature and observe the universe in the way that we are able to. Human beings can solve problems from 2 places. We are meaning-making, collaborative, problem-solving beings that are built to solve problems from fear or survival or ego, or we can solve problems from love and kindness. I know that we're capable of finding enough love within us to love ourselves, each other, and our planet. My wish for humanity is that we rise up out of kindness and love for ourselves and each other and our planet. If we don't, we've squandered a beautiful opportunity to build something really, really beautiful and special. And I think all the things that are happening around us in the world are all just signals. They're just signals asking us to find love and to find a way of being in this world that is whole, that is harmonious. And so my wish for humanity is to come on a journey to finding that love within each of us and that harmony between us and that harmony with nature. That's my wish for humanity.
Well, Katherine, sincerely, Katherine, thank you for sharing your truth with us tonight. I've had the opportunity to sit with you and to hear your stories and to hear your truth. And tonight, you've come out, you've launched. It is happening, and sincerely is not just a brand to you. I know it's more than that. It's your heart, it's your movement. And I appreciate the person that you are and the human that you are, and how many lives this storytelling blessing of a genius you have is going to change. And I can't wait to listen to all the sincerely human stories that will come, and that just your presence of listening and holding that space for others, that is going to change lives. So congratulations, and let's go.
Thank you. Thank you for being here for this conversation. This is exactly why the Sincerely Show exists. To witness real human stories. Stories of individuals that have dedicated their life to service and contribution. Stories of people who have walked through darkness and heaviness and found their way back to themselves, to their deeper selves, towards a place that is more whole, and again to a life of service and contribution. My hope is that something in what you just heard helped you feel less alone, more hopeful, and perhaps closer to meaning and purpose in your own life. This is a judgment-free space. If something moved you, inspired you, or sparked a reflection of your own, I would genuinely love to hear it. Share what this conversation opened in your heart. That is the kind of exchange that makes this community, the Sincerely community, what it is. It's what makes Sincerely, genuinely Sincerely. What I ask is that we hold each other with the same love and kindness that brought us here. This is a place of curiosity, not criticism, of witnessing, not judging. If you are sharing, share from your own experience and from a place of love and kindness. That is always enough. If this conversation resonated with you, please share it with someone who you'd like to hear it. That is the most generous thing you can do, not just for the show, but for the people in your life who are quietly looking for this, looking to feel less alone, for hope, for meaning, for lessons. And before we close, this conversation is for reflection and perspective only. It should not be relied upon as therapy or professional advice. Please always seek qualified support where needed before making any decisions based on what you heard here today, or heard or observed at Sincerely overall. This content is also subject to our full terms and conditions, which you can find on our website at sincerelyinc.com. Thank you again for joining the Sincerely Show. Until next time, please take good care. Thank you so much.